Hello.
Oh, I was worried I couldn't get on.
Hi, Stewart.
How are you?
Hey, Stewart, how are you?
Good.
Oh, I gotta start my video. Oh, let's see. Okay, Courtney's texting me back. Thank you, Courtney.
Yes, sorry about that.
Oh no, that's all good. All good.
And then, do you have the presentation, Brian, or do you want me to throw it in?
I have it. Give me 1 second. Now, let's see. The question is, I think I'm gonna do it on this computer. I've both my laptops up with Zoom pulled up on both, just sort of the just in case, as it were. Okay.
I like it.
Yep, I'm launching the thing. Let me do this. Okay. These spreadsheets.
Okay.
Just in case I accidentally share my
Hi, Adam.
screen otherwise.
Adam, you're muted.
I unmuted him.
Hello, Adam.
He's
Good
free.
to see you.
I like your wallpaper.
Thank you. I'm a big fan myself. we can't tell our backgrounds, which no one could judge our surroundings.
Right?
I could be in Bayside, Queens, or Bridgehampton.
No one can tell. No one can tell. And I wait here. Give me 1 second. Okay, so Courtney, I'm going to share my screen just to make sure that I can in advance.
Yep.
Let me do it this way. Hold on. Okay, closing all sensitive spreadsheets first. Now I'm going to do this,
Very
share
good,
my
very
screen.
good.
It says the host has disabled attendee screen sharing. So I may need you to do so.
That is silly. Hold on.
Or you can promote me to co-host is the other way to do it.
All right.
Adam, is that a
Are you
huge
able to-
microphone right in front of you?
It is.
Brian, are you
Oh.
able to try it again now?
Sure, yeah.
Looks like
I do-
all
I do not have my
Adam's
green
ready to
screen
actually
on.
do a mic drop. That's what he's prepared to do. Okay, here we go.
That's good.
There we go.
Right.
There we go. Here are you all seeing sort of a big welcome screen?
Yes.
Okay, and then we've got these handsome devils.
We sure do.
Okay. In fact, I may leave. Let's see here. And now, you're still seeing the welcome screen, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure that even though I clicked over to a different screen, I'm not suddenly sharing that screen with you. Now, Adam, you've inspired me. I need to load up one of my own Zoom backgrounds.
Is that you with the champagne? I love it. I love it.
Okay, let's see here. Let's do here. And
Hey, Adam, you need more advertising material. How about the Adam Leitman bailing umbrella?
Oh, I could give you the mug or the cycling bottle. The umbrella's downstairs. I can get it if you really want it. We have the ALB mask.
You
Did
do.
you do masks? We were debating masks as like a
We were.
Well, these didn't come out well. These are just for the we donated a summer full of snacks to Elmer's Hospital in Queens,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't come out well.
Mm.
The snacks came out well, but not the mask.
Well, they work, right?
Yes, they work. Yeah, but
That's the important thing is getting them to work.
Well, to you, but the design didn't come out well, which is
Right.
important to me, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
Backgrounds. I'll go with this one. Insert.
I wish I was a title company and I was forbidden for giving out gifts, then I could like just scrap everything.
It has been interesting. It's one of those things that 208 for us was, I know for a lot of title companies, it was like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And for us, it was sort of like, This is great.
Yeah,
We
I
don't
know,
do a
Aaron.
lot of this anyway, so,
Right, it's perfect.
you know. Okay, Stewart, I see your email here, but I see that you've gotten on. Okay. Let's come back here. Okay, good. Okay, are we ready? I've got my sort of talking point notes up. Now, Courtney, the codes, I've got
Yes.
my 1986 and 2020. I was curious, where does 2020 is today's year. Where does 1986 come from?
1986 is the year of my birth.
Okay, I was wondering if this was where the code came from.
1986 is the year of my birth.
Now, where you have the codes in here are, I think it's sort of like one right up in the header right after I do the housekeeping items, and then the other basically at the tail end of
At
the,
the tail end, yes.
after
So
we're
it's
done with
not,
this.
we'll say it's not terribly stringent only because the first AM CLE board is hopefully not listening, but that's the way that they would like them spread out.
Got it. Got it. Okay, and then Courtney, as people come in, you're going to be sort of monitoring so Stewart and Adam, part of the way we've been doing these pretty successfully is to try and direct people to submit their questions through the Q&A function rather than in the chat feature, just because it allows us to queue up any questions in a way that if it's off topic of what we're talking about in that exact moment, it allows us to sort of hold the question and we'll come back to it later and queue it up. So I'll sort of cover that when I go through the housekeeping items topics and go through it that sort of way. But both of you should be able to see the Q&A. If you look on your Zoom controls, there's one of the sort of little icons there is like two little chat bubbles and it's Q&A. If you click it, it pops open a window. You'll be able to see the questions queued up there. And then you can either click to answer them live or type an answer. Now, what you will sometimes get will be someone will ask a question that really shouldn't be shown. When you click to answer live, everyone in the audience, a few hundred people, gets to see the question. And sometimes people put content in the question that shouldn't be shared that broadly. So what you can do is type a response specifically to that person, and then you can still verbalize, and in so doing, sort of anonymize the question a little bit. But otherwise, people can see exactly who's asking the question, and whatever they've typed into the question, people get to see. Which, for the right question is fine. For the wrong question, you don't want to say, when so-and-so asks. So I think I messed up this transaction for my client named George Foreman. You're like, let's not show that. Let's anonymize that for you.
Which George Foreman? I'm kidding. How many people are signed up?
We were at over 300 this morning, and I'm not sure what we're up to now. Courtney, I think just took herself off.
Is this being tape recorded so we could have a copy later?
We can do that. Yeah. In fact, okay. So Courtney, I think the control to do that is on your side.
Yes, and actually, it's in the process of the recording should be about to start.
Okay, great.
Right when it
it looks like it is. Yep.
Oh, yep. Never mind. I did it for 5 minutes early. You're right. So it's being recorded now, and then we will send that over to you, Adam and Stewart.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Completed.
And we actually are over 70 people already in.
75, 77.
Climbing.
Picking up. We should have, the registration was close to 350 when I last checked. And that's not counting some of the people from internal to our organization who are listening in on behalf of some of their clients who were unable to make it. So we should have a great turnout.
Yeah.
And thanks to everyone who has joined the call thus far.
Yes, thank you, everybody. We're excited to get started. We're going to get going here in just a little bit. You're early, which is excellent. We're very glad to have you early. Okay. I've got
Is there an
this.
affidavit or evaluation form sent out previously? Do not seem to find one, Howard.
It's coming to all registrants within the next couple of minutes. Thank you, Howard.
Very good. Okay. Okay. Answer that question. We're almost to 100. Okay, I'm gonna close that. We're ready to go soon here. So we're gonna just sort of let people keep rolling in. As they say in the theater industry, to be early is on time, to be on time is to be late, and to be late is to be fired. But here in the CLE world, with Stewart and Adam, we're going to be a little bit more flexible than that. Even if you're 1 minute past the designated time, we're still going to let you in. So we're going to sort of just hang out here for a couple minutes, give everyone a second to finish checking their email so they can close it and focus on all the great things we're going to hear from Stewart and Adam this afternoon. Okay, got that. I'm inspired by Adam.
That's a first.
Oh, it doesn't want to use this virtual background. Let's try this. Nope. That looks like I'm Santa Claus. That's not working. Okay, let's go back to this. Okay, very good. Let's see, we're at a little bit over 130. Okay, we're gonna keep letting it go because we had so many more scheduled to be here, and it's climbing quickly still. Okay, close this over here. Got this up, okay.
And I've gotten a few messages. Some people are dialed in from their regular phones, so they might not show up on the list with their names.
Right, they won't.
Just FYI.
Cool, we're almost up to 150. I'm recognizing some names on here I know. Mr. Bill Lang and Hesla and Steven. Lots of great names. Okay, great. I'm excited for this afternoon. Roger's in here. Oh, there we go. Okay. And Stewart and Adam, you can see names as well too. But as Courtney just mentioned, there are a couple people that are dialed in, so their name doesn't show. Okay. Let's see, we're growing quickly. Okay, we are a minute or two after the hour. Very good. Ready to get going.
Brian, would you prefer I make you the host or co-host?
Sure, make me co-host in case there's
Okay.
anything I need to
Great.
to I don't know, police our participants.
Better
our
safe than
panelists.
sorry.
It's with these two titans duking it out. It's more likely I may have to do that. Based on some of the planning calls, you guys we were trying to just have the planning calls, but you guys were ready to just get into the issues and just
Duke it out.
dive in, which was excellent.
We've
Sorry,
been
go
doing
ahead.
this for a decade.
The last time that we were at Lincoln Center stage, they had us take a photo of us with boxing gloves, boxing glove pose.
Very good. Okay. Very good. Let's see. We are clicking away. We're about to cross 200, and we're 3 minutes in. So I'll wait probably about another minute and a half, and we'll get going here. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Assuming everyone's got a decent billable rate, every minute with a couple hundred participants is a fortune, and I can't afford to waste that much of a fortune here in New York City when we need that energy going into getting our economy really rocking and rolling again. So I want
Here,
to here, right? Here. Very good. Okay. Okay, we're at 4 after. So as I said before, in the theater world, if you're on time, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, you're fired. So we're gonna, in the respect of everyone's time and energy and all the great stuff we're gonna get into today, I'm gonna kickstart our meeting, even though we've still got some people that are rolling in to the class. So my name is Brian Tormey. I am the president of TitleVest, title operation here in New York City. We operate in 44 states around the country. I sold the company about 5 years ago to First American, and we were part of the First American family of companies operating across the continent and the globe. We're here for all of your title insurance and 1031 transaction needs, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us at any time for any need. We're here to serve you. Without further ado, I'm very excited to welcome two esteemed guests to our panel today. We're going to cover a whole bunch of topics. We've got a lot of exciting things to go through. But first, I'm going to sort of give a big shout out and thanks to Stewart, Saft, and Adam Bailey for being here. We're very excited to have you here, gentlemen. I'll give a little quick intro of you two, if you don't mind. I imagine there are very few people in attendance who don't already know you, but just in case, we'll cover some of the basics. So Adam is the founding principal of Adam Leitman Bailey PC. He's actively at the helm of the law firm that he helped build from scratch, and he practices residential and commercial real estate law. Among New York's most successful and prominent real estate attorneys, Adam is one of the 2 attorneys from a law firm with less than 30 attorneys that's been ranked in Chambers and Partners and honored with a Martindale-Hubbell AV preeminent rating by Best Lawyers for himself and his firm. Selected for a Super Lawyer Award in New York's top 100 attorneys, a list that includes only 5 real estate law firm attorneys. The internationally esteemed Chambers and Partners has repeatedly selected Adam and his team as one of New York's leading lawyers in real estate. Chambers and Partners hailed Adam as a tenacious and confident litigator who's quick-witted in court and respected by the judges.
I thought I cut down the intro to 1 line. What happened to that? 1 line.
It took 8 paragraphs and made it 2.5.
Okay.
Anyway, I won't wax too poetic, but Adam is well respected in the courts, and he's going to bring a lot of litigation perspective to today's class. And sort of, we've got a lot of things going on with our courts as of late, and it's impacting how we're all doing business, which brings us in part over to Mr. Saft. So Stewart Saft, we're very proud to have the partner and the New York real estate practice group leader from Holland & Knight here with us today. Stewart is he co-chairs the firm's global condominium development and conversion team, and was the former co-chair of the firm's hospitality resort and timeshare group. He has extensive experience in the development, financing, leasing, and conversion to condominium and cooperative ownership, exchange, syndication, sale leaseback, timeshare, restructuring, acquisition, and sale of residential, commercial, and hospitality property throughout the United States. Suffice to say, he can basically handle any kind of real estate conversion transaction you might dream up. Mr. Saft also represents borrowers and lending institutions in mortgage lending and workouts. Stewart is the former chair of the board of directors of the National Cooperative Bank and the New York City Workforce Investment Board. Stewart has written 40 books on commercial real estate and more than 100 articles on real estate, economics, and finance. Mr. Saft is also the author of 3-volume commercial real estate workouts published by Thomson Reuters Westlaw, which is in its 3rd edition. And Adam has recently published another book as well, Adam, right? Do you want to tell us a bit about that for a minute?
Yes, it is called Real Estate Titles, the Practice of Real Estate Law. Michael Berry and I, it's almost 3,000 pages and covers everything you need to know about real estate law. Very proud of it.
Yeah, very excited. Okay, before we get started, I'm going to dive into a couple sort of housekeeping items for everyone. And let's see here, I've even got a slide here that helps us. Nope, I don't have the slide here. We're going to go back. You guys get to look at these beautiful mugs. So the housekeeping items that we're going to go through real quick are, we do very much welcome questions. The best way to submit a question is in your Zoom nav bar, where you can sort of see whether it's mute yourself, start or stop your video, your participants, and then there's a Q&A function next to it. So it's 2 little sort of talk bubbles next to each other. If you click into Q&A, you're able to submit a question. It allows us to sort of line up the questions and answer them in flow where they sort of make most sense in the sort of structure of today's conversation class. So please do that. That's far better for us than putting them in the chat function. If questions go into the chat function, then it's a little bit hard to keep up with all of them and make sure that we've answered all of them. So please use the Q&A function. That being said, if you would like to unmute yourself and there's a question or something that you sort of want to say and you really want to give voice to it as opposed to typing it out, you can either raise your hand, as Laura just did here in 1 second, and we will sort of unmute you, and you, Courtney, who's helping manage this, will unmute you, and you can sort of give voice to your question if it's a little bit more nuanced in that sense. Otherwise, everyone is muted just so that we can keep the focus on our speakers for today. And you're welcome to add your comments and sort of chat into the chat function, obviously, or give perspective on things if it's not really a question. Okay, since this is a CLE, we will be sending out a review form momentarily. You will need 2 codes during sort of for your form to be able to get full CLE credit. The first code, please pull out a pen, pencil, or chisel and write down 1986. 2 years after the Orwellian novel of 1984, we are looking for a 1986. 1986 is your first 4-digit code. We will get to the next code later in the presentation. Okay, with that, today we're going to be asking some tough questions of 2 of our top attorneys who've navigated the pandemic crisis successfully, and talking about some of the secrets and transactional insights that our transactional attorney Stewart and our litigator Adam are bringing to the table and helping us sort of things. Okay, so Courtney, if you have again, just to note, if you have a question, best to put in the Q&A function rather than raising your hand. Raising your hand would be best only if you really have a question that you want to voice. Okay. As Adam mentioned earlier, the last time, can I repeat the first code? That I definitely can do. The first code is 1986, 1986. And I will actually, first code, I will type that in so people can access it later. There we go. Okay, 1986. The last time these 2 gentlemen duked it out was in a public debate on the main stage at Lincoln Center, so we're very proud to have them here. Today, we're going to discuss how do New York landlords, developers, and practitioners survive and thrive in phase 3 of the pandemic and crisis and beyond. Some lessons learned and strategies proven by these 2 industry leaders. Okay, first, let's start big and bold. The pandemic. Stewart, what should we have done differently as individuals, citizens, investors, borrowers, business owners, developers, employees, creators, and consumers? We'll sort of leave politics out of this. There's lots to get into there if we so chose. But for now, let's focus on sort of as individuals, business owners, developers, investors. What are some of the things as you sit back and look at the last few months, broadly speaking, big and bold assertions? What should have happened differently with some 2020 hindsight?
Well, I don't think anyone, either in the government level or in industry or individuals, was in any way whatsoever prepared for this to happen. and it is rather shocking. After 9/11, and we had to deal with 9/11, I figured that New Yorkers are never going to be caught off guard again. Then Superstorm Sandy came along, and New Yorkers were caught off guard again. Now we've had this pandemic, we've had everything that's arisen out of it. We have a horrendous number of people who've died. And on every level, we were unprepared for this. And I think that the part of the problem is that no one is really doing strategic planning. And so you have a government at whatever level you want to pick that was unprepared for this. You had a city of almost 9 million people, and there weren't enough hospital beds. There was no planning of what would we have to do if we had to close the schools. Now, this didn't have to be a pandemic. It could have also been a terrorist attack. It could have been a problem with the infrastructure of the city. It doesn't really make a difference. There was no plan. And I'm not just pointing the finger at the city. I'm also pointing the finger at the private sector and all of the agencies, government or ungovernment. And I think we're seeing this play itself out. Fortunately, Governor Cuomo stepped in at a certain point and created New York, the on pause and then New York forward. And so we've managed to go from a situation where thousands of people were dying to one where we pretty much, for the time being at least, dealt with the mortality of the situation. And of course, the governor is very worried about another wave, especially considering what's happening in the South. But I think that going forward, and I've said this before, each time we've had to deal with something like this, there has to be very specific plans as to what happens. We have to have backup hospital rooms in case we have to deal with this again. Someone early on had a good idea of why don't we just take the empty hotels and use them as hospital rooms. We need to have housing for doctors and nurses and healthcare workers that are going to come into New York to deal with this thing, and the hotels could have played a part in that also. We need to have a way of continuing to educate our children, notwithstanding the fact that the schools are closed. There's all this discussion now about whether or not we're going to reopen the schools or have children learn through virtual learning. And I think it is incredibly important for the next generation to be able to sit in the classroom, socialize with other students, and have a one-to-one with teachers. And the schools closed when in April. It's now the end of July. There should have been by now a plan in place as to what we were going to do with these kids, even if it meant breaking a class into 2 or 3 classes and finding other areas to hold these classes. We have thousands upon thousands of still have thousands upon thousands of empty hotel rooms that could be turned into smaller learning centers. And very little thought, or at least it appears that very little thought is being given to this. If there's another wave of infections to come to New York, and each time I see reports of gatherings of people who aren't masked, when we now know that masks are the only way to protect us until there's a vaccine, it could easily happen again. And so the most shocking thing that I have found on every level was how unprepared we were for a catastrophe. And we were very lucky that it wasn't far worse than it turned out being.
Okay, so preparedness. Adam, thoughts?
So I agree with everything Stewart said, but I'm looking at this as, yes, the government on every level failed us. Why I first learned that the government failed us when a boy at my children's school told me that his father was flying in from mainland China with the flu in mid-February. And obviously he had COVID. And that's when I realized that they had not shut down the airports coming in from mainland China, which is, there's no excuse for that. That's the federal government. But, at every level, we failed. But moving forward, the first priority is our health and keeping our citizens alive. But at the same time, we can't let our citizens die of starvation. We need to have jobs. We need to keep people employed. So how do we save lives and at the same time keep everybody employed so they have meaningful employment and jobs, so we don't have food lines, so everybody has a chance to eat? Early on, because we represent hospitals and we're doing access agreements in 881 battles for hospitals, financial institutions, insurance companies. These are some of our clients. Title companies count as insurance companies. We were given an essential services letter by the governor or the governor's department or whatever, Empire Development. So we were working throughout the crisis with masks, gloves, all these steps set up as you're seeing now very early on. And none of our 50 employees got sick or got COVID. And what I realized was that you can have this virus going around and still work. And for our democracy to continue and for our republic to exist as a strong economy, we need to be able to figure out how to work throughout. And we can do this. And yes, if you don't have a mask, there should be a law that you should be arrested. There's no excuse for not having a mask. And we need to have more scientists or whatever is going on. Like, I'm going to stick to real estate, but we need to figure out and get a vaccine going. But at the same time, we need to be working effectively and digging out of this abyss of an economy and getting our workers back to work.
Well, so on that and the sticking to real estate, let's take this, still staying high level, but turning a little bit more specifically to real estate. Generally speaking, if we have to answer the question of what have the pandemic and the related economic impacts, both the stimulus dollars, as well as sort of the economic impacts in the markets, what have these things brought forward as, in your professional opinions, in the short term and in the long term for New York real estate? We'll sort of focus this on New York real estate. So what do we see in the short term and the long term as the impacts coming out of the pandemic and the related economic events?
Okay, so I'll go first on this one, I guess. So for the short term and the long term, right now, the biggest problem with New York real estate is the fear. FDR once said that the only thing you have to fear is fear itself, which for a long time, I'm like, that's not the smartest thing in the world. What is that? It's a political statement, but it's true. By fearing that everyone's leaving New York, which there is a migration out of New York, by having such bad legislatures, by having such bad local government, by having people in government that do not have vision, that have the inability to have vision and make strong decisions and have leadership, and by passing laws that hurt real estate, yes, many real estate people are leaving and investing in other places. So we need to elect people that are not socialists, that believe in working on solutions for businesses and that are not angry at businesses and not anti-business like many of our leaders, number one. Number two, we need to create incentives for our businesses to want to create jobs and stay in business here. Number three, we cannot tax the hell out of real estate anymore. It's just not going to work. It's just beyond ridiculous that you're taxing the one area that you don't want to leave and you're forcing them to leave and to go into other states and other parts of the city. that's not gonna keep people here. That's short term. Long term, infrastructure. Penn Station finally needs to go. We need to have jobs to build a new Penn Station. One top leader once said that every time he walks through Penn Station, he spits. Yeah, I mean, we need to create great infrastructure throughout the city where we can have jobs that we're going to need to create the city that Mayor Blumberg once envisioned that a lot of people got in the way of. I don't know how we take the state legislature and get rid of almost all of them and replace them with people that are competent. I don't know how many years it's going to take, but if we don't do that, we cannot expect New York to be the city that it was. And I'm 50 years old. I don't know if during my lifetime we're going to be able to do that quick enough. I don't know what Stewart thinks of the subject. Stewart, what do you think? Because I think you're 1 or 2 years older than me.
Well, and let's make sure to help focus on not just what we want to happen out of the pandemic, but what we've seen change. Like, what are the impacts that we've seen so far in your experience?
Well, let me give you the quick answer to that. What we've seen right now is the courts are closed. So, number one, the courts are closed, so we can't seek justice in the courts. So anytime since the American Revolution, anytime that we've had a problem where someone wasn't living up to their contracts, we had a place for grievances. The state legislature, city council have passed laws that have interfered with private contracts and said, no, you can't collect on your private contracts. First time that the government has passed permanent laws where you can't, this guarantee law, where you permanently cannot collect on a contract. So you're sending a message to the entire country and New York investors saying, be careful if you enter into a contract in New York because you may not be able to collect on it. These are messages that are horrible. They're moral and contractual hazards to New York investors. So these are two examples that are just disastrous. Stewart?
Thank you.
What do you think?
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. I'd like to take the discussion in a slightly different direction than attacking.
So you're avoiding the question. I understand it.
No.
I understand. Yeah.
I think there's a broader issue here. The broader issue is the fact that it comes down to a statement. What do we owe each other? There's a social contract that we all have an obligation to each of us to watch out for ourselves, but also to protect others. And that seems to have fallen apart to some degree. And it's very troubling. I mean, in a situation where we had one coronavirus case at the beginning of March, and within 2 weeks, there were thousands and then tens of thousands. There weren't enough proper masks to go around even for the healthcare workers. And it was shocking. And I can't believe that in the 21st century in the United States, in New York, that we didn't have material to distribute to protect the doctors and the nurses who were going in to protect lives. And I have a client and a friend who put together a fund and purchased and distributed for free 750,000 pieces of protective equipment so that our healthcare workers and the people who were first responders in all of this could have survived. The issue isn't really what the legislature has done or what any elected official has done. The real issue is that we really didn't look out for each other. And it was every man and woman for themselves. And that's really a shame because that sort of ignores what Emma Lazarus wrote that's on the Statue of Liberty. It really ignores who we as New Yorkers are, people who have always stood together in wars, stood together after 9/11, stood together during the Great Recession. And now we're having people walk around unmasked. Now, I can't change, and you can't legislate morality, but you have to be concerned about how this is going to work. Who do you blame that there weren't enough good hospitals in every neighborhood of the city when for the last 4 or 5 decades, every level of government were looking to conserve costs and didn't go out and spend money on infrastructure? I mean, Adam is right in the fact that to a very real extent, we've become very provincial, but we have to do something to change the way we think. And I think we have to do it immediately. We can't wait for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. We have to take inventory of what assets we have in the city, and we have to figure out how best to allocate them so that, and we have to do it now, because if there's another wave of this virus next month or in 3 months or in 5 months, or if the hunt for a vaccine is really a panacea and we're not going to have a workable vaccine for a couple of years, this is not over. And we have to prepare. Yes, I think Adam's right. I think if people are going into the subway and not wearing a mask, they should be arrested, plain and simple, because they basically are killing their neighbors. And I find that shocking. What else can we do? Well, we have to find a way to work with the various unions to change the way they operate for the betterment of everyone. I can tell you, from the real estate point of view, very early in this, we sat down with the leaders of Local 32BJ, who are the service workers unions that represent all the building workers in both the residential and the commercial buildings. And we discussed with them what was going to happen with regard to the staffing of buildings. What was going to happen if members of the staffing, if the staff of the buildings got sick and we had to move them around. And they were incredible in terms of saying, yes, we can change their hours. Yes, we can lengthen the day so that they only have to work 3 days a week rather than 5 days a week, so there would be less commuting back and forth. And they really stood up, notwithstanding the fact that it wasn't in the best interest of, or it wasn't part of the union, the collective bargaining agreement between the local and the real estate industry. They stood up and they said, we'll do what you need us to do in order to protect the people who live and work in our buildings. Hotels now, I've read that 1/3 of all the hotels in New York City are going to close and not reopen. And of course, we've heard that 50% of the restaurants aren't going to reopen. So we're gonna need help from the hotel workers union in order to bring down the costs to operate. We're gonna need help from the teachers union in order to get our kids back into school, into actual classrooms, and not have them spend a year looking at a screen. And in order to do that, we all have to work together for the betterment of the city that we're all in. How long will it take? Adam, I wish you a very long and healthy life, but you will be here when this is all solved, because maybe it'll take 5 years for New York to get back to where it was. Large urban centers are critical to the success of our society, New York State, and the United States. And there's an article in today's New York Times that's right on point, and it says that the 10 largest cities in the country produce an overwhelming percentage of the wealth and the patents and the thought. The Economist ran an article a couple of weeks ago as to why large cities are so essential. So we can't turn New York City into farmland. We have to maintain it the way it is, because it's the engine that produces the revenue for the state, and it's the engine that produces the revenue for the country, as is Boston and Washington and Philadelphia and many other large urban areas. And we just have to get them to work. And in this regard, Adam's absolutely right. We really have to remove the politics and the extreme left versus the extreme right, and think in terms of how to rebuild our city. Yes, we have to make it fairer, but we also have to make it work better. And it's, in that regard, the article in today's Times was accurate. I mean, we're basically left with a almost blank canvas. We can't force all of the real estate owners out of business, although there are parts of society that think that the government should own all residential real estate.
And they've been really good at that over the years.
Adam,
Yeah.
let me just finish what I'm saying.
Go ahead, sorry.
And the reality is, the government can't run real estate. They'd like to, but we saw what they did with the New York City Housing Authority real estate. It's probably the most dilapidated housing in the country, so bad, in fact, that the Trump administration had to step in. Imagine how bad it has to be. So we need, in terms of real estate, we need the owners, the operators, and the government agencies who think that real estate owners are evil to work together. Real estate owners are not evil. If they were evil, they wouldn't want to put more money into their properties. And one of their objections to the Housing Security and Tenant Protection Act is that it precludes them from being able to spend money to maintain and improve their buildings. And so we've drifted off into two different directions, and that has to stop. And it has to stop for the good of our city.
So let me take what you've said. I'm sorry, Brian.
Well, I want to dive in because we've got some questions coming in, and
Okay.
and some people want to get into some meaty legal topics as well. And I think these are good high-level topics, but I do want to drill us down into to comb those sort of very particular knowledge sectors of your respective brains. So one question we have coming in from Ari is, and this is sort of on the we're sort of switching gears a little bit onto the litigation, the court side, which Adam, you mentioned and talked about for a second. You know, Ari's question, how would you handle a company like Foot Locker that has taken the position that they are not going to pay rent for the period that they were closed? So Adam, some thoughts on this, and maybe giving thought, you know, obviously from the landlord side of it, I think.
Okay, so the first thing that we're doing is we're drawing down on Foot Locker security deposit. We're checking the lease, we're making sure there's no notice provision. If there's a notice provision, that's a problem, because then they go get a Yellowstone injunction. That's a different lecture. If there's most leases do not have a notice provision to grab a security deposit. So we take that down. That's usually 2 or 3 months security. Then the next thing we do is we send them a notice of replenishment to get that paid. So even when the courts were, even when they said that we can't start a non-payment action, we were always able to go after the security to get it back. Number 2, we would send them a pre-negotiation agreement. We'd have them waive their defenses, sign a confidentiality agreement, and then we would ask for all their assets and show proof of that. In that list of things we would ask for is their PPP loan. All Foot Locker is required to give us at least 25% and up to 40%. They have to give us at least 25% to make that PPP loan from a loan into a grant. So we know that money's coming. Then once we know where their assets are, and not where they are, I'm sorry, that does tell us where they are. And we know what they are and how much they're hurting, then we could then know what kind of deal to make. And many of the deals, and the reason that my voice is so sore is because we're doing these all day. So then we can make deals like a third abatement, a third deferment, a third paying rent. And the PPP loan, now remember, this happened in March, so you definitely had enough rent for April, right? April's rent. So now we're dealing with hopefully June. PPP loan comes in June, so you hopefully have part of July. We've drawn down in security, so that you're paid in full through now. Foot Locker's paid in full through now under my scenario. Now we're going to the summer, and that's where we need to make the deal. And that's where we need to see your assets to see how much you're hurting. A place like Foot Locker, where they really don't have much traffic, now they're opened up. Now it's a negotiation. Now we want to see your assets, and now we know they can at least pay a third because of the PPP loan. And now we can't see October, but that's where they're really going to need us. And that's how we're looking at it. Now, what are we looking at? Is there a guarantee? How long is the lease? How much do we want to keep the tenant for? And that is the formula we're using to go by each tenant.
So I've got a different question, a question from a different attendee, Wei Tan, but it's a variant on some of what you just went to, which is, so Wei Tan says, lots of my rental clients are deciding to close down their business. Restaurants, nail salons, and they wish to cancel their lease. Most standard Bloomberg contracts with a good guy are with a good guy guarantee. What is the best option at this point? So now imagine you don't have Foot Locker, this sort of, well-provisioned enterprise, but rather sort of a small business, a mom and pop shop.
Right, so the mom and pop shops should get on the phone immediately with the landlords. And they should say, hi, we're going to send that form to them, fill it out. And if they show us that they don't have the money, most of the landlords are making deals. Why? Because they rather have the tenant with the rent they were paying from March than the new tenant that's in the worst depression that's since the American Revolution. So they rather keep the tenant. However, if that tenant was a poor paying tenant before March, then that's a different story. So it really depends on tenant by tenant. But they definitely need to call their landlord and make the deals. Most landlords are giving away free rent right now, but you got to have a conversation and you got to be able to show your financials. If you're not willing to show your financials, then the landlords are not working with you.
Right. And Stewart, what are you seeing on the sort of development side? You've got a client who's lined up and is launching a conversion or a new building things. They had anchor tenants on the commercial space downstairs. How are they approaching it from your sort of side of things as you're looking at these? And they're in their own world of hurt, and then now they've got sort of rent issues that they're facing as well.
Well, I have to tell you that every time I've had this issue come up in the last couple of months, and it's come up quite a few times, I basically said to the tenant, let me see your books. Let me see that you aren't making any money. And most of the operations are...
My TV, put close on.
Many of the operations are large garage operations or national credit tenants. And when I asked to see the books, all of a sudden they no longer have a problem.
Here's my money, right?
That's it. I have one building with a huge garage, and the garage lease was signed 20 years ago, and it's and the rent is significantly below market. And the garage operator came and said, business is terrible because of coronavirus. You have to let us not pay our rent. And I said, let me see your books. And then we could talk about restructuring the lease, since you've been paying significantly below market for 20 years. For some reason, they didn't want to discuss it any longer. So there are, yes, a lot of businesses are hurting. There are also businesses that are taking advantage of the situation. And somehow there's this general belief that the landlords can just absorb all of these costs. And it's not true, because the city, is imposing all these restrictions on landlords and limiting evictions. But I haven't seen the city come forth yet and say that until the coronavirus is gone, you're not going to have to pay your real estate taxes. Or if you don't pay your real estate taxes, we're not going to charge you 18% interest. So the city is not helping in any way. And certainly the lenders are doing as much as they possibly can, but much of the debt on the large construction is CMBS debt, and you have to deal with special services. And so that brings in a whole host of issues that you have to deal with because the special services have very limited authority of what they can do. And even in this environment, the special services or servicers are attempting not to foreclose and not to press the issue to fruition in order to help the businesses proceed. There's legislation pending in Washington to enable the government to give assistance to the CMBS borrowers because it's in nobody's best interest to have that kind of massive default across the board. And 100 members of Congress from both parties have written to the Fed and to Secretary Mnuchin asking for this legislation. Hopefully something will come of it because the CMBS loans result in bond payments being made to millions of individual citizens who invested in this, and they need their cash flow also.
Mm-hmm.
You know, every aspect of our economy is tied together, so that if there's a default, even if the default is by the shoemaker, it creates a problem for the owner of the shoe store, which creates a problem for its lender, which creates a problem for the city trying to collect real estate taxes. It goes across the board, which is why I said that we really have to work through this together because we are so interconnected.
Yeah.
And wait, that interconnection is very important, Stuart. Great point. Because the commercial landlord would be a lot more amenable and give a lot more rahmanis, a lot more charity, if the lender would be more reasonable with the workouts. But it's not happening. Number one, there's very little credit on the market. Number two, then there's not much negotiations between landlord and the lender. So that chain of commands is hurting that commercial tenant. So it's lender to landlord, commercial tenant, and there's not much room for the landlord who needs to pay their mortgage to have room to make too much of a deal. And they're making them anyway because they need some money from the commercial tenants to stay in business.
Can I comment on this for a second? As you mentioned, I was chairman of, I think we lost Adam. Oh, there he is. I was chairman of the National Cooperative Bank Board during the last big recession. And I can tell you from experience that banks don't want to foreclose. Banks don't want loans to have to go into special servicing. Banks don't want to have to change the risk rating of the loan and then have to find regulatory capital to make up for it. So the last thing that a bank wants to have is REO, real estate owned. So the banks, by doing nothing, are really providing breathing time for everybody to figure out how to do this.
Remember, it's not the banks that are saying when they're doing nothing. It's the court system and the government saying you're not allowed to go to court and foreclose. That's what's causing that. Number two, I am not on this call representing any banks. However, I represent just about every bank you could think of. And on these calls, which I'm an aunt on these calls, it's business as usual. But the banks are not signing any foreclosure notices right now. But let's see late August what happens.
So let me turn and take a question so we're speaking a bit about strategy of the various industry participants, the lenders, the landlords, the tenants, and the litigators and counsel representing them. Let's talk for a second about the closure of the courts and the implications that's having on strategy. And the question I would have for you is, when do we think we're going to start to see some openings? Prognosticating as best you can, not what you wish would happen, but if you had to wager, if you had to make your best guess, what do you think is going to happen from a court opening? And then based on that, and this is for both of you, what do you think are the strategies that you would bring for your landlord clients, your lender clients, and your tenant clients?
So for the last few months, there's what is said, what is in a press release or a video.
But
and
I'm
then there's
asking,
what's
what would
happening.
you put money on?
No, well, we're living it. So today it came out that we're going to have in-person housing court, and that finally we could buy an index number today in housing court. We've been told that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
If that is true, we were also told that we wouldn't be able to, if we get a housing court number and we're able to start a case, they're going to be adjourned a long time. So I got three cases from the pre-pandemic. I got 3 cases from pre-pandemic court dates today, and they're October 10th. October 10th. So what we've done is we've started all of our commercial cases and our residential cases in state Supreme Court. And those have been going pretty smoothly, except there's an 8 to 10 day wait to start those cases to get an index number. Out of the blue, they just stopped. In Manhattan, Brooklyn is going a little bit smoother. However, for a foreclosure case, even before the moratorium, they were just not allowing motions. They were not allowing you to move forward. So basically, even if the governor said you could move forward, even if the chief judge said move forward, the court said we're just not going to do that.
Yeah,
It's basically an insurrection by our court system.
How would you pivot that now, and maybe Stewart, think about it from some of your developer, the landlord side. Okay, now knowing what Adam's just said, housing courts has just today opened back up. Do you think that that's going to change how you're counseling your clients?
Litigation is not the solution. Okay? When I was a young associate, I was given a foreclosure to defend, and I didn't know anything at all, and I managed to hold it up for 5 years.
Yeah, because they hadn't invented the pen yet.
Adam?
Sorry.
The bottom line is that Adam is a great litigator. But the problem with litigation, and it's out of Adam's control, and every litigator's control, the problem with litigation is that it is incredibly slow. It takes a long time for anything to be accomplished. At the end, nobody's happy with the result. And so, yes, Adam is going to go into court and he's going to commence all these cases or defend a huge number of cases. And he's very, very good at it, and he's very creative. But it's still going to take a couple of years to get a resolution. And we need resolutions now. So, yes, I think, I'm glad to hear that the courts are open. Yes, Adam is right to want to be as aggressive as he can possibly be. But since even without, Adam points out that, the system is going to play games. The system was designed to play games. As complicated as it is to foreclose, and as complicated as it is to try to evict somebody in New York, between the changes that the legislature made last year with regard to rental housing and the changes the legislature made the year before, 2 years before, with regard to foreclosures, it's really a very slow way of having to deal with these problems. Now, Adam has to commence the litigations in order to put pressure on the other side to negotiate. But it's a difficult system where you have to go to the courts and you have to go through all of that, and then people who can't afford lawyers are sort of screwed by the system. And we need a more efficient way of dealing with these problems. And unfortunately, it's not the court system, or there needs to be a way for the courts to be changed in order to accelerate the process if you expect to get resolutions from the court. And maybe the answer is very short discovery periods, things going on trial calendar very quickly, increasing the number of judges by 200 or 300%, and moving these things along, and then it would be relevant. But as long as it's going to take 2 years to evict someone, as long as it's going to take 5 years to foreclose something, the solution isn't litigation, because it takes so long to accomplish it.
See, I understand what you're saying, Stewart, but we don't intend on having our cases litigate to the end. We understand that as soon as we're allowed, now we've gotten started. And yes, there's moratoriums on commercial cases until August.
Uh-oh.
Oh, it was. I was like, is that me? No, it's Adam's paused. Well, so while we wait for Adam to unfreeze, I'm going to ask my next question.
Okay.
And then Adam will he'll rejoin us. So the question I would have next was sort
August
of
5th and August 13th with a warrant for an eviction. So the key for us is we want to settle it as much as possible. We want to negotiate. And by giving free money out and by putting the carrot in front of the horse, we're able to get deals. We know we want to offer more up front so we don't have to litigate. We just want to get a 2-attorney stipulation of settlement that we can get to a marshal and a sheriff if and when they default. And that takes away the whole litigation game, because I completely agree. You don't want to litigate. It's too much time, too much money, and that's not where you want to go in this market. But having the courts open is a really big deal. Because number one, what happens when courts close? That's South America. That's when czars take over, or what do we call those? Dictators. We don't want to end our democracy over that.
right.
So if the courts are open and we could get in front of a judge, we could settle those cases.
So
Brian,
I want to go.
Brian, anytime you want me to do one of these with Adam, sign me up. You don't even have to ask me.
Fair.
That's funny.
Fair. So the question I want to go to, we've got some interesting questions coming in with very specific situations and cases, sort of situations that I'm gonna make this a little bit more broad, because I can't go through all these questions. Right now, based on the closure of the courts that we did experience, based on the preparedness issues, based on, Stewart, as you sort of spoke about very, very much at the beginning, this was a curveball we weren't expecting. As you're putting on your counsel caps and speaking with clients who are entering into new legal agreements, whether that's a lease, whether that's a development agreement, whether that's a purchase contract, what are 2 or 3 of the top new things that, 4 months ago you weren't saying that we got to make this a priority in our legal agreement structure, but now you're saying this is something we're going to make sure we put in here?
Well, I can tell you that for about 5 years, I've been putting in expedited arbitration in every agreement I write. Now, frequently it's removed. Sometimes the clients don't want it, but and Adam's a great arbitrator, so I'm not taking business away from him. But I think it's a more efficient way of handling certainly business disputes.
Mm-hmm.
And we have private agencies in the city who are very good at handling expedited arbitration.
I agree. And Stewart's an excellent arbitrator as well. The problem with arbitration is once we get an award, which unfortunately with arbitration takes a lot longer than the court system, somehow we have to go to court to enforce it. And that takes a long time as well. So it's like double court. It's like having 2 courts having to decide. Stewart?
Well, my experience isn't that arbitration is as slow moving as litigation, unless you're in the federal courts, of course.
Well,
No, I want to bring us back to, so what are, but post, I mean, we're not post-COVID, but post the initial pandemic, what have we learned? What are you thinking about in terms of structuring your leases, your contracts, your purchase agreements?
Okay, number one mistake. Let me give you some of the top 10 mistakes. Number one mistake of commercial transactional attorneys is, number one, how dare you not have a self-help clause in your leases? Number one, if you had a self-help clause in your lease, I could have evicted these commercial tenants behinds from day one. How dare you not have a self-help clause?
Adam, there are two parties that negotiate these things.
Right, but you should have insisted on that or no deal. And we could have gotten rid of this crisis with landlord versus tenant with that in there. Shame on you, commercial tenant, commercial landlord attorneys.
I don't know that we need the shaming, just the
shame on you, because self-help is enforceable. I've written at least 8 articles on it, and just unbelievable.
So that's
Okay.
definitely number one. Okay. What else?
Number 2, guarantees, good guy guarantees and regular guarantees.
GGGs. Yep.
Except for the May 7th to September 30th permanent waiver for only 5 categories, the guarantors are on the hook. So those are very important to have in there. Stewart, go ahead. I'll let you continue.
Thank you. I think that we really need 2 things to happen. The first is that we need all of our force majeure provisions to include pandemics. And there's this huge cloud over the entire legal system as to whether or not this is a force majeure situation, and will New York's very conservative law in terms of enforcing force majeure apply. And we need a broad indemnification clause, because there should be no lawsuits creating liability for somebody because somebody else contracted the coronavirus. And that's going to put a strain on the court system and on the ability of society to proceed for years to come. And those are 2 open questions, because we don't know how the courts and we don't know how the legislature are going to deal with them. But certainly, force majeure is number 1 on my list of making certain every agreement that I write in the future speaks in terms of a pandemic as a force majeure clause.
I respectfully disagree. The Stewart is brilliant, and he's one of the greatest attorneys of our time, but he's not a litigator. Force majeure, except for one case in Illinois right now, force majeure, even if it's in the lease and you have to review the lease provision, but it still requires you to pay rent. The 2 weapons you have for not paying rent for a commercial tenant is, number 1, the winning one is frustration to purpose. And the second one, where basically the purpose of the contract is blown up, is called impossibility. Frustration to purpose is the purpose of the lease you cannot do because the government basically took it away. It's frustration to purpose. And there's going to be some great litigation that we're involved with already that's going to decide that. The second one is a possibility. You wanted to have the concert. The government closed down. We're saying you can only have 50 people there, and that's a possibility. And those 2 are the winners. Force majeure doesn't work because it always says you still have to pay your rent. Now, if Stewart takes the clause and says,
and overturn.
You don't have to pay your rent, then that would work for Stewart. But it's frustration to purpose and the possibility of the 2 winners, and we're already litigating those 2 in our cases.
So I'm gonna interrupt us all for a second, and I'm gonna give the second code for the class. We are at the top of the hour, so I want to respect that. Stewart and Adam, if you're game to keep talking through some of the topics for a couple more minutes.
But I'm getting some emails here that people want me to answer questions.
Yeah.
If Stewart and I could go through these and do a 60-second like ESPN, those 2 guys, I'm happy to do that.
Let's do it. So I'm going to give the code.
From one email, people are challenging us. So
Who wants to give us the code?
Yeah, I want to give the code to all the participants so they can get their credit. So the code is 2020. You can consider it a vision number, a year number, or a pandemic number. 2020.
Thank you.
Absolutely. 2020.
Adam?
You want to get your credits. And please make sure to fill out the form that was emailed out. I think I saw it from one of the comments here that we may have accidentally sent. It wasn't the full 2-page form that was sent out. We'll make sure that you have the right form. But
Don't forget to send it to your panelists also.
I will send it to the panelists also. We got to get you credit. Okay. So, so Adam, you're right. I've got a whole stack of questions here. I just want to interrupt us to give everybody the code. Again, it's 2020. Okay. So I'm going to go, we've answered some of these in sort of a general sense. I'm going to go with Howard Kurtzberg's question, which is a little bit of a broad question as well, but I'm curious of some of your thoughts. He asks, how is the pandemic affecting real estate leases, office, and retail? Now, we've talked a lot about retail so far in today's conversation, but I want to take Howard's question and tag it in with a question from Hal Rose. Hal asked a question: what would you recommend for law firms that entered into a lease personally, no longer need the amount of space that they rented originally, and or cannot afford the current rent? Would you recommend paying rent going forward if they have it, or withhold in an effort to negotiate a deal with a rent reduction in the balance of the lease? In your experience, how much of a discount are landlords giving in exchange for a lease extension? So I'm going to open this up to sort of some general commentary as well as specific strategy commentary around office leasing and what we're seeing in that sector.
So I'm not seeing a problem with office leasing. The most of the problems are retail. With office leasing, not most, but when there's a problem, it's dealt on a more professional level. We get the call from the office tenant, and it's a law firm or a professional organization, and they're telling us, here's what's going on. We can't pay. We want to hand in the keys, and we want to exercise the good guy, and we're making sure we're paying in full. It's a different conversation. It's not fill out the sheet. It's almost all of them are handled very well, and we're getting paid. So that's not one of the problems we're having. Stewart, are you seeing something different?
No, I'm not seeing anything different, but I want to answer the question in a different way. There's a tremendous discussion around today and in the industry that as a result of people working remotely, law firms are going to take less space in the future, business is going to take less space in the future, and the landlords are going to have a lot of empty space. And I can tell you, after working remotely for almost 19 weeks, there's no possible way that I'm going to opt for working remotely rather than being in my office after this is over. I have a call every morning with the 30-odd lawyers and paralegals in my group, a social call. We just want to see how we are and talk about what's going on in life. And not a single person on that call is saying, yes, this is wonderful. I love working from my bedroom and want to continue to do so. And what I find is, and this is very important because it goes right to the question of whether or not law firms should continue paying for the space. What I find is that this working remotely in 30 some odd different directions is the most inefficient work method that I've ever experienced in my life. Whereas before, I could get up from my desk and walk 20 feet and sit down with 2 or 3 other lawyers to walk through a situation, to discuss how to strategize something, to deal with a client issue. Now it's a couple of hours putting together conference calls and Zoom calls. Perhaps salesmen could work from a remote location, but it really is not working, and we're managing to service all of our clients and providing as good a service as we can. I have a high-speed scanner that I'm scanning documents to my secretary in New Jersey. She turns them around. Without any preparation, we came up with workable systems, but this is not something that any of the attorneys or paralegals in the real estate practice at Holland & Knight are prepared to do 1 minute longer than we have to. We want to get back to our offices. So my answer to the question that Adam was answering was, Yes, if a law firm feels stretched right now, they should negotiate with their landlords for time to pay back the rent or possibly a discount. But don't give up the space because all of a sudden you're going to think your lawyers are going to want to work from home. They aren't. Adam?
I completely agree. Every one of my attorneys says that they are productive, but not as productive as they were in the office, and they miss the drum roll, meaning the collegiality and my walking around the office saying, "How are you doing?" Basically, it was a big compliment. They said somehow when you walk around the office, it motivates us, and we do better work. So. I could be making this up, but that's what they said.
And if you're still walking around with the whip, that helps also.
You know what? I'm going to buy one of those. But, you know, the Me Too movement may be still existing, so I got to be careful.
Yeah. Not if you hit everyone equally.
Well, yeah. Oh, I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
So
Stage two.
we've got some other interesting questions here. So one attendee was asking, and Adam, I think this was something you were saying was asking about the self-help clauses in commercial leases, and they were asking, you know, how enforceable are you seeing them?
They're absolutely enforceable. Court of Appeals, Appellate Division, all 5 boroughs they're enforceable. And the only thing is you have to make sure that the commercial lease explicitly in bold tells you what you're doing and lets the tenant know that you have this right and makes it clear, and they're enforceable.
You can't slip it into the agreement. It's got to be sort of.
It can't be small print where you can't read it. It's got to be open. Yeah.
Yeah. And Stewart, this goes a little bit to a question, you know, let's go back to that law firm looking to renegotiate type thing that you were just answering and sort of speaking to for a second. Howard asked another question. Wouldn't it be better to have a lease extension versus an abatement? You know, if you're in that situation and you're representing that landlord, would you rather give an abatement? Is that an easier negotiating tactic, or
is that me or Stewart?
I was framing for Stewart, but it could be for either of you.
Okay.
But if you want to play the role of Stewart, you can.
No, I'd rather Stewart be
You can put
Stewart.
on glasses though.
I'm not as good looking or as charming.
Quite the contrary. So the answer to the question is that a lease extension is better for the landlord, but doesn't help the tenant. The tenant needs the rent relief right now, not getting an extra year put on the back end of the lease. So it's
Well,
like
I would assume Howard meant an extension in exchange for, look, give me a break, let me pay 50% for the next 3 months, and I'll tack another year of full rent on the back end.
Stuart, I can give you an example. Stuart, let me give you an example.
That makes sense.
Let me give you an example of how we're using it, and Stuart can elaborate. So what we're doing is they want a rent abatement or deferment, and they've been a good tenant. So we're saying, okay, we'll give you a bigger rent abatement than we were thinking of, or deferment through January. But in exchange, we want you to extend your lease 2 or 3 years. And that's a deal we're willing to make. That's the question that they may be asking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing we're doing frequently.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Yeah. A question that actually did come into the comments, but I think it's a good question, which goes back to that force majeure conversation we were having a second ago, is the tenant obligated to pay rent during the force majeure period? And Adam, you spoke to this a bit, but I think maybe can we drill down a little bit more specifically?
Yes. So the force majeure is something that exists in a commercial lease. It's not a common law doctrine. It's a paragraph in a commercial lease. And it excuses the tenant from having to pay to do its obligations under the lease. However, in all force majeure clauses, the tenant still has to pay its rent. That's why it doesn't help the commercial tenants in a commercial lease.
Unless you did some type of specific within force majeure, we're calling out specifically that in this kind of force majeure situation, we have a rent waiver for a period.
And we're going to call that in New York the Stewart Saft exception, which is going to redo.
Great. We do need a shorthand for it.
Yeah.
Okay, Chandra says, are you seeing any exercise of termination clauses under the current situations?
Are we seeing termination clauses? Yes, But this is what happens. This is fascinating to me. They send in the surrender agreements that we're surrendering the lease. And we write them a letter back. Thank you for surrender. If you do surrender, there's a case that my partner Jeffrey Metz won, and I say just like that because I'm very into self-promotion from the old days, and a little bit's left in me.
As we see,
and I say, we won this case called Kenny Cole, because he's from Long Island. His name was Kenneth Cole, Kenny Cole, versus Holy Properties. And in New York, unlike 26 other states, you do not have to mitigate damages, meaning you don't have to try to rent this commercial space in New York. So if you surrender your commercial space, we could lock up the doors and not try to rent it out.
for the balance of the lease.
For the balance of the lease, you're on the hook. So if you want to surrender your space, great. We're going to go after the guarantor, and we're not going to try to rent out the space. Again, there's a good chance. So good luck in surrendering the space. Or how about this? How about you fill out the pre-negotiation agreement? We work together. We give you deferment or rent abatement. You pay your PPP loan, and we work together on staying in the space. And
So
that is
that's-
how we're going.
If one of our attendees is representing the tenant in that situation, they shouldn't go through the surrender approach. Instead, they should be pursuing that approach.
Well, if they're going through the surrender approach, they may want to be talking to a bankruptcy attorney at the same time. They may be consulting a bankruptcy attorney at the same time, and they may be looking at their assets because we're going to be going after them.
Got it. Okay. Let's see here. This one moves us out of sort of the commercial sector into sort of an interesting personal sector. Robert asks, my daughter rented a venue for her upcoming wedding. She cannot use it because of the restrictions on the number of people allowed in the venue. Can she get her money back? What are some thoughts on how you might approach that situation? Maybe Adam, you get to play landlord, and Stewart, you get to play, person who wants to not pay the rent. Not a tenant per se. I don't know what they are. So Adam, what do you think?
Oh. Wait, I missed it because
Oh, did it
my
tie
phone-
freeze?
yeah.
Okay,
Hold on.
sorry about that. The question was, someone's daughter has rented a venue for a wedding. She can't use it because of the restrictions around the number of people allowed in the venue, etc. What are the tactics? Can she get her money back? What are the tactics and strategies from a landlord side that you would propose, and from a tenant or renter side?
Wait, so she, what happened at the beginning?
She rented a venue,
Right,
for a wedding.
commercial. Okay,
Commercial venue for a wedding.
right.
And now can't use it because of restrictions on the venue.
Okay, so number one, it depends on the contents of the agreement.
Mhm.
This is not real estate, so you got to be careful.
Right.
So it depends on what the agreement says. Most of the wedding venues actually have a clause on this,
Mhm.
and some of them are pretty rough. But most of them say the following: they say, if something happens where we can't have your venue, you could pick another date as long as it's not X, Y, and Z dates.
Mhm.
So they allow you to pick another date. That is enforceable. If they don't like the other date, that's a problem. Okay, but let's say there is no other date and they can't pick another date. Then you're going with either impossibility or force majeure. I'm sorry, not force majeure. Impossibility or frustration of purpose, as long as the government shut you down and the person that signed the document did not, as long as the government shut them down and the person that signed the document did not cancel themselves.
Okay, great. The ironic thing was an ex-employee just called me on my cell phone to interrupt this, whose wedding was stalled, but she was down in Florida, stalled by a hurricane. She redid another day. I helped officiate the wedding, and it went off great on the second date she chose after the hurricane shut down the first one. So I hope that your daughter's wedding goes off without a hitch successfully, Robert. Okay, so we've gotten through those. I'm going to go back. We had some exciting questions that we were going to get to, and we haven't gotten to yet. I'm going to go back to one of them that I wanted to get to. Yes, Stewart, this is really for you. A bit of a perspective on the marketplace. In the past recession of 2008, sort of through 9, 10, 12, we saw a lot of developers here in New York pivot their projects to become rentals. While they sort of waited for the market to return and strengthen again. We've seen a softening in the market. I think real estate agents, broadly speaking, have sort of seen this a somewhat agreed upon softening in pricing on the market. Do you see, in light of the many things happening with developers, do you see that pattern playing itself out, or what kind of pattern do you see playing itself out in terms of new, just coming onto market, or only partially sold out projects?
I don't see wholesale rental of unsold condominium units the way this has been handled in the past, as a result of a combination of the Housing Security and Tenant Protection Act, which contains provisions that apply to all rentals, not just rent stabilized or rent controlled rentals. And there's a piece of legislation that was introduced in January, and no one has talked about it since then, until today, when I saw some articles with regard to people who were just elected to or just got the Democratic nomination for the Assembly and the Senate, and that's the Good Cause Eviction Bill, which I don't think anybody thought was going to be enacted in 2020, but the general consensus was that in 2021 it would be enacted. So I think the lenders, and remember, the decision whether to rent or to sell is primarily going to come from the lenders as opposed to the developers, because it's the lender's money that's not being repaid. And I think that the lenders are going to opt to leave to not rent the space for fear of losing control over what the asset is going to be going forward. I also think that and this may sound very strange, we may not be at the point today, but all of this excess inventory that's sitting there is going to be absorbed. It'll probably take 2 or 3 years, but it absolutely will be absorbed. What we're going to see as a result of the Housing Security and Tenant Protection Act is we're going to see a lot less development in the city going forward. And we're not going to see conversions of rental buildings to condominiums. So people coming into the market, their only option is going to be buying condominiums going forward. And so once the existing supply is absorbed, then the market, the supply and demand will come into play again. And you'll see the prices going back up, which is the incentive for developers to not dump their units because of this. And it's unfortunate that the housing supply, instead of growing, is going to shrink. Part of the reason it's going to shrink is because part of the Housing Security and Tenant Protection Act limits how much landlords can recover in improving apartments after a tenant moves out. And putting in new bathrooms and new kitchens and meeting all of the current requirements can easily cost $70,000-$80,000 an apartment, and the legislation limits them to being able to recover $15,000 over 30 years. So you're going to have apartments that won't be in the condition to be rented. The landlords have pretty much lost the ability to convert them into condos. And so the housing stock is going to go down rather than up. Adam, what do you think?
I look at it differently. Why would anyone with the restrictions from the HSTPA that passed in June 2019 ever again want to build in New York City when they have to worry about another law passing, number one? Number two, these incredibly intrusive laws that are so horrible to developers have caused so many of my clients to try to build elsewhere. The good news is they're making such little money elsewhere, they may have to come back. Number three is that not only in June 2019 were these laws where it incentivized landlords never to improve an apartment ever again while the law is in place, at the same time in the same month, as of January 2020, at the same time that the HSTPA was passed, the new criminal laws came into effect, which has made our city very, very dangerous. As of January 2020, the amount of crime has passed new records and you may not be reading about it because it's not happening on 60th Street and Park Avenue, but it will be soon, unfortunately, and it's dangerous. And my brother-in-law is a police officer, and his view is no one's protecting us. These laws will not keep anybody behind bars, so we're not getting involved and we're staying on the sidelines. New York City is a dangerous place to live right now, and they need to change these laws back.
And so does that, as we now sort of step back and talk about the economy of New York City for a minute, as it relates specifically to sort of the driver that is real estate, right, which is a major driver of our economy here in New York. Stewart, it sounds like the impact of real estate is, look, we're sort of going to have to take a couple punches and hold our breath and wait it out. But even after that, we're going to have some return, but not as much of a return because of some of these implications. And Adam, yours is almost an even more dire perspective. Would you give me color on sort of those quick summaries on sort of as you look forward in the economic future of New York City as it relates to real estate?
There are five basic industries in New York that are the drivers for the economy. And they're the fire industries, FIRE.
Mm-hmm.
And it's finance, insurance, real estate, and entertainment, which is also hospitality. Now, we're at a situation right now where real estate is hurt, finance is still strong, real estate is hurt, insurance is still strong, and hospitality, entertainment are in terrible shape.
Yeah.
And it's going to take time to restore the entertainment and hospitality industries. It
Mm-hmm.
will happen. The hotels are going to have to be, the way they operate are going to have to change, and the big hotel companies, and particularly the ones that I represent, are spending a lot of time and money thinking about how they can reimagine the hotels to provide more safety for guests. It's going to take real estate time to rebuild. We need to bring retail back. We need to bring restaurants back until the entertainment and hospitality industry can begin to rebuild, which is going to require people to feel more safe and more comfortable. It's going to take time to do, but I don't see this as a 20-year cycle. I think that it'll take 5 years for the hotel industry to fully recover. They have recovered to some degree. And then it's just, and as the hotel industry recovers, the entertainment sector will, and then slowly real estate. If anything, there's a fifth segment, and that's the education and medical part of the city's economy, which is a huge driver over the last couple of years. And education is hurt temporarily because of the fact that the students can't come into the colleges and universities. That as soon as we get past the coronavirus, that will instantaneously correct itself. And then the hospitals, we have the greatest hospitals and medical centers in the world in this city. We're just going to have to give thought as to how to expand what they do to more communities within the city. But that's a manageable problem. I have an old saying, and that is that anything that can be solved with money isn't a problem. And I think that it's going to take money to solve a lot of New York's problems, but we have the ability to do so.
Mhm.
And I don't see the crime that Adam speaks of, but you know, I read reports and I know what it says, but I also grew up in this. I was born in Brooklyn and grew up in Queens. You might tell from my accent. And the only time I haven't lived in New York was when I was in the Army in Virginia. And I've seen the city through the 70s when crime was horrendous and 800,000 people moved out. I've seen the city in the 80s when it seemed to be unmanageable, and then Disney came in and all of a sudden 42nd Street, which was horrendous, turned around. It's going to take some very difficult decisions. It's going to take somebody with a vision or a group of people with a vision as to how to do this, but it's doable. And it's just a question of how long it's going to take, but it will be accomplished.
Yeah.
I agree with everything Stewart said. I believe that Stewart and I and other visionaries need to be sitting at a table weekly for the next couple of years, working on solutions with the private sector.
I'm a fan of private
And
sector
then-
solutions.
And that is the only way that we're going to get out of this abyss and bring New York to what it was before.
Okay.
And by the way, the reason that crime is very high if you look at the numbers, but so much of New York is not in the city right now. But imagine when we come back.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, we're at time. We've actually gone 30 minutes over our technical time, but this has been a super engaging and amazing conversation. I'm gonna thank you both for all the insights and guidance. We've got, you know, so many different perspectives on things and thoughts on how to approach leases, how to approach litigation, how to approach development negotiations, maybe avoiding the litigation side of things, and some prognostication on where we think the market is going to go. So Stewart and Adam, again, a huge shout out and thank you to you both for being here. Stewart, we may take you up on signing you up for something. Adam has just proposed a weekly gathering of brainstorming. And you've already given me authorization. I have 250 some witnesses to it to sign you up. So who knows? Maybe we'll turn this into a weekly gathering.
Brian, I want to thank you and TitleVest for this opportunity to pontificate. And most of all, I want to thank my friend Adam Leitman Bailey. You left the Leitman out at the beginning, but that's okay. My friend Adam Leitman Bailey, for it has to be 20 years. Every conversation is like this. He'll call me, I'll call him, and we'll wind up arguing. You can't even imagine over what. And he's a good friend. He's a great lawyer, and I always enjoy dueling with him.
Yeah.
Feeling is mutual. Brian, I thank you for having this, and it's an honor to be with both of you on this discourse.
Yeah,
And
agreed.
and
I think discourse like this is very important.
I was just about to say that these are very important things, and hopefully they help in small steps, help our economy and get us back on track again.
Yeah, agreed. With that, thank you everyone for coming and participating. Adam and Stewart, you do get to fill out your evaluations as well. Hopefully you rank each other well. Again, your codes were 1986 and 2020. Thank you very much, everyone. Signing off and looking forward to the next one. Take care and have a great week.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.